Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. Today we have a completely unique episode. It will be the first time that we've covered any of the works of L.W. de Laurence. De Laurence was the owner of a publishing company, de Laurence, Scott and Company, and Spiritual Supply Mail Order House in Chicago in around the 1900s. And he distributed a lot of public domain books like The Secrets of Psalms and some other books, and had a great and lasting effect on African American urban literature, and was the publisher of the Bible of Obeah. Although he is mocked and reviled among modern occultists for his plagiarism of the pictorial key to the tarot by Arthur Edward Waite, and S.L. McGregor Mather's The Key of Solomon. He also wrote his own works, including The Master Key. And this is the book that we're going to explore. There is 2 amazing chapters in the book that cover the secret of abundance and the art of getting rich. In reality, de Laurence was somebody that wrote about magic and a number of different forms of magic. And this book is comprised of a ton of different lessons on everything that you can think of. But at the end, there's these 2 chapters. And I thought they really stood out, and it will further our understandings of prosperity and abundance. This is something that I regularly dedicate time to on the podcast. We have discussed abundance and the art of getting rich in so many different episodes and through so many different authors. Each time we explore any written works that discuss the secret of abundance or the art of getting rich or prosperity or any of those things, there's always something that's a little different, that's somewhat new, that we learn. We put these things together and it creates an unstoppable mental thought process and understanding of prosperity and abundance as an actual physical thing that you can create through your thought process and mind. It's a part of reality creation. It's a critical part. Every time I do one of these episodes or thereafter, there's somebody that will post a comment in one of the videos saying there's really no place for this discussion in spiritual discussions. And I say that for many people I meet, they're not interested in spiritual discussions because they're scared to death of paying off their debt or paying their next rent payment or even finding a job. And if you're in that place where you don't feel the abundance, it's a world of lack, a lot of times you're not in a situation where you're going to go through the spiritual journey that you need to go through, that connection that you need to have with the universal mind. You're not going to have it. So I think it's a prerequisite. And once you have gone through this process, it's a way of testing out your metaphysical abilities and a way of understanding the ability for you to create your own reality. It's all tied to money. And as I have discussed in several episodes, money is a living entity. It is God in action. And there's a way to tune into it. There was a way to think about it. There's ways to bring it into your life. I don't care where you're at right now, because I was there, upside down, owing so much money that at any moment I could get a knock on the door from the collector, and my credit score was terrible, and I had given up hope that I could fix this situation. There was no way I was going to get a loan or qualify for anything, and I had no way of finding prosperity in my life. And then the only thing that I had was my mind. And I started to utilize my mind, and it changed my life. I believe that de Laurence is talking about this very same thing, and that the poverty I had was a sickness that had overcome me, a state that I had entered into, a state that's written about in the Bible, the state that's written and seen in all the world that we walk through. And I started to understand the power of states. And here we can really tune into that state through these writings from the Master Key, which is The Secret of Abundance and the Art of Getting Rich. De Laurence begins by saying, poverty is as much a disease as pleurisy. Only the former attacks the mind, and the latter the body. You never knew an energetic, spirited, and pushing man who was really poor. The poor in purse are almost invariably poor in mind. Of course, one must not include in this category people who prefer leading a simple existence, with no hankering after servants or cars, large establishments, and 1001 etceteras which characterize modern life. There are many who, with a humble cottage and plain fare, scarcely have any use for money, their wants being so few. By poverty, I mean a state in which men can scarcely get enough to eat or cannot pay their way as they would like. Going a step higher, I should include among those whose ambitions rise above their means, but I am not concerned at present with this class. My present aim is to stimulate those who are in want of means to sustain life comfortably, to show them a way out, to revive that hope which once they had in abundance, but which contact with the world has well nigh utterly obliterated. The cure of poverty, it must be admitted at the outset, is no light task, but it is curable in nearly every case. It does not seem to have occurred to people, except a very few, that no one need be poor. The saying about the poor being always with us seems to have been taken as an utterance that applied to all countries and ages, and the problem of the unemployed, which every civilized nation has to face, lends color to the idea. As a matter of fact, if we take nature, we see that she is almost wantonly extravagant. Look at the millions of seeds produced in flowers, which cannot possibly grow up. Note the myriads of tiny cells which constitute the spawn of fish. Mark the lavishness and prodigality with which vegetation covers our fair earth. You will recognize that there is nothing miserly or stinting about divine nature. This is really a lesson for man, if he could but see it in the right light. And I, like many writers on the subjects of faith and confidence in oneself, have been endeavoring to the best of my powers to scatter broadcast during the last few years the conception that no intelligent, able human being need be in dire want. One of the objections frequently raised by those opposed to a sensible socialism, not the view put forward today by socialists, is there's not enough money to go around. And it has been affirmed that the earth could not produce sufficient food to maintain the inhabitants if the number grew beyond a certain proportion. These good people forget that not a tithe of the treasures of the earth have been extracted, and that science would have to be reckoned with where the question of food supply was concerned. I merely instance this objection because it stands in the way of reform with many people. First, the well-fed, moneyed class consider that the state of things is irremediable, and then the poor man imagines that conditions as we know them today are part of the natural order of things, and that if he were not in poverty, somebody else would be, and that it might as well perhaps be himself who should suffer, and so he loses whatever grit he has in him, and he becomes what many would be inclined to call philosophic, but which I should prefer to designate resigned. I trust I have effectually removed this barrier, and now comes another, an important one which bars the way to plenty, the belief that the ability to make money is only given to a few people who are really clever, or that there are a class of people who may be termed lucky. I think I have shown in this volume that there is no such thing as luck or chance. We must admit that people differ mentally as well as physically, but it is frequently more in degree than in kind, and it is often the case with those who had a defective bringing up or scanty education. They are prone to exaggerate their weaknesses. This exaggeration acts very prejudicially and is at the root of much of the poverty amongst the people. To cure poverty, you must believe what is an absolute fact, that you are of use in some way, that you have something in you, that the impression of your acquaintances that you are a very commonplace person is merely an impression caused by your own conduct. In turn, this impression has reacted on you till you begin to believe firmly where before you had only a suspicion. It will show in your conversation, stamp itself in your walk, your features, your manner all around. You advertise your littleness wherever you go by your appearance, and servility clinches the unfavorable opinion formed of you by a prospective employer. All that is written above should be read and reread till it burns into the mind as the cure of poverty has been revealed. To get a better opinion of yourself, think. I know it is the most difficult task that could be set all poor folk. Had they learned to think, they would not have been poor. They would rather do anything than think. Many will plead that they are not cut out for thinking. They have had no education. Shakespeare hadn't, but it did not prevent his becoming a genius. Few self-made men have had any education, and many men highly educated are as poor as crows. We live in the busiest age on record, and the hands or brain of every human being are urgently needed. If you went to an employer of labor and told him you had an idea which would save his expenses by a third, or increase the efficiency of his business, do you suppose you would not gain his ear if you approached him in the right attitude? Improvements are capable of being made in everything you can mention. Once you've learned to concentrate your mind and think, you have solved the problem of poverty, and for this reason, you've opened up unsuspecting avenues of thought, suggestions that will mean money to you in the long run. You have the same stuff in you as Milton, Goethe, Edison. But it never occurred to you, did it? It only wants rousing, bringing into activity. Every man and woman is a gold mine to themselves, and instead of letting others exploit them, they should exploit themselves. It is never too late to begin, unless you've turned 80, and with some men this age would not be an insurmountable barrier. With a better opinion of yourself and the habit of thinking and controlling your thoughts so as to concentrate them, you will begin to make plans. Judgment and tact, that rare virtue, will show themselves. Means will come to you to overcome difficulties, and you will come into possession of that priceless gem, initiative. You will see the necessity of being thorough in whatever calling you may take up, so that an employer can rely upon you. Once gain the confidence of an employer, and poverty and you will rarely meet. Make it a point to know your business from top to bottom. Concentrate your mind on your duties willingly with a light heart, for you are building for the future. Get into close touch with the very poor, and you will find that they invariably consider that only people with marked ability can get on. You can have the ability just as well as anyone else. It is not the prerogative of kings. The poorest and humblest man may cultivate it, but mark well, thinking is the basis of it, for by it you dispel ignorance, the greatest curse from which mankind suffers today. Willingness to learn is a sign of the successful man, and as ability is gained, the other dread ally of poverty, fear. They always go together, therefore by destroying the one you destroy both. Will loosen its hold on your heartstrings, and hope will take up its abode. At this point, you should take stock of yourself. You will now have valuable assets, and the next step is to make the most of them. Are you working with a system? Are you utilizing your time well? Are you getting the best and highest out of yourself? Do not be content till you do. Whatever plan you may have commenced, give it a fair trial. Too many cases of failure have arisen from giving up too soon and not sticking with bulldog tenacity. To the man who sets his teeth and vows he will go through whatever the cost, fate gives way. It is a well-known fact in psychology that an idea, even though devoid of truth, a mere delusion, if held sufficiently long in mind, becomes at length to be regarded as a truth. A knowledge of this law is of incalculable worth to you. Test it now if you are poor. Apply it to your own case. Banish for the time being the canker of care, the paralyzing effect of worry and doubt in yourself. Probably you have been indulging in the luxury of these mental visitors for days or weeks, so you can afford to dispense with them for 10 or 20 minutes. I know full well the great sacrifice I am asking you to make, for you have an idea that by turning over these worries separately, you are deriving a species of sympathy which is very comforting. You have perhaps poured your woes into the ears of friends, some willing and others the reverse. You have afforded the only solace that life holds out, just as some people are only happy when they are miserable. When you are miserable, the state is so infectious that your friends avoid you when circumstances permit. We are all familiar with the class of persons who are always finding fault and picking holes or criticizing others, or things generally, deriving immense satisfaction and comfort from the discomfort they cause. Probably they have seen no harm in this habit of supplying sympathy to themselves. As a matter of fact, their greatest enemy could not have inflicted a greater injury upon them. What practical good has it done for them? Has the habit solved their problem? What has it done in reality to have weakened their makeup to an incredible extent? It has literally poisoned their spring of success. It has magnified their weakness and their want of self-reliance. Every time you sympathize with a weakness, you strengthen that weakness and render yourself less capable. You paralyze sources of action, destroy initiative, prevent the inception of new ideas, and clog the mental machinery. The one factor which is to lift you out of the slough of poverty. It deepens within you the feeling that you are hardly dealt with, that other folk are helped and are lucky, while everything goes wrong with you. I know the feeling which is better understood than expressed. Get among the unemployed, and they will tell you how by a bad trick another fellow did them out of a job, or how a chap who can't do his work a patch as well as you has been in regular work for years. Cease whining. Cease envying. The men who have kept their places have had some qualifications, for there is not much room for sentiment and favoritism in business. The man who holds a post because he is in with the foreman or an official is on very insecure ground, for changes are frequent and removal of the foreman may be followed by the dismissal of the incompetent employee. If he does hold his position, however, it is no affair of the other fellow. Every man is concerned with himself alone. It is his business to see that he is thoroughly efficient in whatever his calling may be, quick, diligent, reliable, ready to be shown or to learn. Such a man is certain of regular employment. He can employ himself, in fact, for as soon as a man has confidence in himself, he is fit to be his own employer. Each time an unkind, mean, angry thought passes through your brain, each time you criticize others, pass judgment on them, discuss their failings with others, you are nursing the poverty habit. And for this reason, poverty is a condition of inharmony. Prosperity is a condition of harmony. All criticism, etc., creates inharmony, and harmony cannot exist in the mind at the same time. One inevitably neutralizes the other. Inharmony antagonizes, and antagonism being destructive in its character of mental force, which is only generated in sufficient quality and quantity to meet the demands made upon it by the body and mind, is wasted. This waste of energy might be turned into another channel and produce force, which would enable problems to be solved and ideas carried to completion. Further than this, the entertaining of such thoughts cause physical changes in cell tissue, manufacturing by some of those marvelous processes of chemistry poisons which break down the health, and no one who is poor can afford to dispense with good health. Men who are in poverty and rags do not trust themselves, or they would never have been in poverty. They have placed their trust in other people, hoping that they would make it all right. If they did not, then fear rushed in, and away went their hope, followed in hot pursuit by self-respect. I do not care how low down a man may be, where he may be placed, however sordid, however apparently hopeless his position. He can remedy it. But the cure must begin by trusting in himself. He has the same force, the same powers at the back of his mind as all of us. All that is needed to use them, and a thing can only be used by bringing it into daily life. By idealizing surroundings and the daily life as outlined above, you are insensibly led away from poverty and its inevitable degrading surroundings. An actual new life is lived, and in casting off the influences of the old, the mind takes on new aspects. Hope and trust are born into the nature, and ambition and determination are not far behind. There will be the belief that circumstances are beginning to change. Poverty and doubt pulls down, hope raises. No one wants to engage a man soddened with the quality of misery or pennilessness. It would get on the nerves of many an employer, and when the staff was reduced, the man stamped with these qualities would be the first to go. A man of this type never does good work. He has no heart, therefore his work is more or less mechanical, and this is soon noticed. We cannot expect employers to be philanthropists. Often they are driven by the scourge of competition and cannot help themselves. A bright face is often quite as much a tonic to them as it is to others, and brightness often goes hand in hand with intelligence and interest in one's work. A bright disposition often brings about an alert state of mind, frequently leading to keener observation, and inventions are frequently made by workmen of this type. Bright intelligence often leads to smartness of movement, dexterity in one's calling, and the quick eye of the employer, who is always surrounded by the clock watchers and stallers, soon detects the stuff a man is made of. When an employee really begins to take an interest in his work, when he is on the right path. But it does not necessarily follow that a man in poverty need be an employee. If he will faithfully follow the instructions given in this volume, he may devise means by which he will free himself from his cramping environment. Not a quarter of the inventions possible have been invented. Not a tithe of the riches in the earth has been suspected. Not a thousandth part of the possibilities of existence has been touched up to the present, and all these possibilities are open to you. But you must think. When an idea comes along, do not dismiss it as wild and improbable, but try and make it as clear as you would the idea of a house you would like to live in. When Professor Morse offered to sell his telegraph apparatus to the American government in 1845 for $100,000, the offer was refused. Today, the Morse system is capitalized for $222 million. Professor Alexander Graham Bell offered to sell his telephone patents to the Western Union Telegraph Company for $60,000, but the officers of the company said it was only a toy and had no commercial value. This same toy, according to the annual report of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, just issued, earned $160 million last year and has now more than 5 million telephones in use throughout the country. Of course, I do not imagine that you will initiate a colossal scheme like the first two, although any man who is not a congenital idiot may become a genius if he wishes. But this illustrates the idea I'm endeavoring to make plain, that provided we are fair to ourselves and try to develop more of what is in us, we are certain to enlarge our mind and expand our consciousness. Many a man fails to improve his surroundings through lightly casting aside an idea which only needed a little more maturing, a little more hatching to blossom into a really good thing. It is not education we lack. We have too much of what goes under that name, and the fact that the vast majority of wealthy men were never conspicuous for their learning enforces the assertion, but a lifting or a shifting of our conception, a different standard of value of ourselves, and once that different attitude towards ourselves is adopted, the way is comparatively smooth. A hint may be gleaned from the case cited above. Don't get in a rut. All poverty-stricken men travel in them. Don't do a thing in the way your forefathers did it, if it can be done in a better manner. Always be on the lookout for improvements and cultivate the habit of observation. A Russian proverb says, "He goes through the forest and sees no firewood." But the cultivation of concentration and observation, the wits will be sharpened, and the mind more alert, quick to take advantage of an opportunity, quick to apprehend, and the best aid to that indispensable qualification to all success, executive ability. Cut yourself off from your newspapers for a time. That is, unless you can discriminate. there is a large number of daily newspapers published in this country. Sunday papers, some of them printed on cheap paper and news to match. Analyze any of them, and it will be seen that they consist for the greater part of full reports of every crime committed in the United States, and the bulk of the cases occurring in other parts of the world. The most sordid details, the most abject, pitiful, sickening, and disgusting items are given as fully as the law of the land will permit. The shady, poverty-sodden side of humanity, with all its weaknesses, its vices, its wickedness, its meanness, craftiness, is set forth with such a superabundance of minuteness that not only could a criminal career be learned by it, but it would even induce many weak-minded people to emulate the men figuring in them. Revolting incidents from the divorce court, the hashing up of trickery and chicanery of the world. In a word, anything and everything which will not only depress but will drag the mind down are to be found in the wretched specimens of the gutter press. Wallowing in the filth, is it any wonder that a man's tastes become debauched and he loses an interest in good literature? Never mind being out of date with your news for a few weeks or months. When a crab is going to cast its shell, it hides in a crevice where it can lie undisturbed until the new shell has taken the place of the old one, when it can once more go forth. So with a man who would cast off his old mind, while the shedding process is going on, let him feed his mind with the best food obtainable. Good literature is plentiful and cheap enough in all conscience. But I would advocate dispensing with cheap newspapers in the ordinary sense, or read only the best with comments on the world's happenings or thoughts. The daily paper has got to be looked upon as a sort of necessity by some people, and it is a good sign when it proceeds from a keen interest in one's country or progress of mankind. But even this can stand aside for a short time, as can the religious press, for much the same reason. They all tend to weaken the optimistic faculty in man. Naturally, man is a bundle of hopes, but as one after another is damped by wet blankets, hope begins to give up. And then indifference, misery, and finally hopelessness sets in, from which the grave kindly rescues many. The sensational and sentimental drama and sickly poetry are two other sources which contribute to this weakening process. They hold before the eye with dramatic force the conflicting emotions which surge in the human breast, its passions, its foibles, as well as its noblest impulses, and while it may be a veritable mirror of life, it is not what many would have. It is a fresh probing of wounds some souls would fain heal, an awakening of sad memories they would prefer to bury forever, an ever-recurring reminder of the dark side of existence, which they would cast from them forever. When we read heart-rending accounts of misery, see plays poignant with grief, we discuss them with friends, or if we keep silent respecting them, someone will discuss them with us, so that we keep alive within us and sear into our very soul the pains from which we have struggled to free ourselves. In conclusion, the cure of poverty is the result of real growth, mental and emotional. The nature which is poor in love, in sympathy, in goodwill, belief in himself and his inherent powers is poor in the pocket. To stint and stunt the nature is to stint and stunt the money-making possibilities. If you feed on poverty thoughts, there is no use for money. It could not be appreciated, and however much might be obtained, it would do no good, but would dwindle away. Many are familiar with the old saw, a fool and his money are soon parted. Most of us have known cases where very poor people accustomed to live from hand to mouth, having come into money, have soon been in the same plight. The proper use of money can only come to those who have evolved to a point where they can use it intelligently. Money can never make brains in a man, but brains can make money, and all the wealth of the world is the result of brains. A lump of gold would not have any value were it not for the brains which first enabled it to be wrought into something, coin or jewel, etc. The most precious substance in the universe today, radium, would not have been a penny a ton a century ago because brains had not discovered any use for it, and the same thing applies to everything. Evolve yourself and you make yourself of use. There is a need for you. You fill a position which only you can fill. It may take you some time, but what you gain is yours for all time. The enrichment of character means the new layers of yourself have been reached, and everything brought into manifestation must express itself, or in other words, must act so that the added growth will open up the opportunities you cannot foresee at present, and poverty will no longer affright. As like attracts like, so the poverty mind attracts poverty. And so long as the mind remains of that type, so long must poverty be expressed in the environment. A locomotive made to run along on its steel rails does the thing for which it was made. It cannot fly in the air or travel on water. A clock fulfills its functions by indicating time, but no one would expect it to record changes in the atmosphere. So with mental states, it is no use having ideals if the mind has not reached those levels where the ideals can be used. The mind would have comfortable circumstances must always keep at a higher level, because by so doing, the within thus created would find the without inadequate or not corresponding. So the without would follow the within, or a simpler illustration would be the pouring of a jelly into a mold. If the mold were misshapen or plain, so would be the shape of the jelly. If the mold were artistic or beautiful, the jelly would have to pattern itself likewise. When you grow in mind, in which sufficient or plenty is the dominant thought, in which the notion of poverty would appear so grotesque, so foreign to your nature, as to be unthinkable, then you have created a mold, and the substance which will fill it, your circumstances or environment, must follow the pattern. Truth gives rise to truth. A lie breeds lies. A rose produces a rose, not a thistle. Good thoughts cannot produce bad actions. Everything fulfills the law of its being. An effect must be like its cause. Sow thoughts of prosperity by having faith in yourself, and you cannot reap anything but prosperity. But the thoughts must ever be of this type. To think now of poverty and then of prosperity will only yield indifferent results, for one neutralizes the other, as I have shown more than once in this book. Reflect well over this truth. Poverty will not pass away until you create something better to take its place, and every man can create this something better. Take courage, go in and win. 12 Affirmations for the Elimination of Poverty. The following sentences will, if repeated with understanding, daily bring about the change in consciousness which will eradicate completely doubt and the poverty habit. The weakest man living has the powers of concentration folded within his organization, and they will remain folded until he learns to believe in their existence and then tries to develop them. To prepare for the life of opulence absolutely full of the power that draws wealth, I must stand by the person I am. I must uphold my aim by believing in myself and never slacken one link of the good opinion I have formed of it. Also, know, each outreach of thy soul bears deep the seal of cosmic impulse aeons. That thing heart-hungry every fiber thrills to reach, hath sought thee down the ages hungering too. You will never reach the place where you have all you want to spend except by commanding yourself to spend and to want to spend less than your income, whatever that may happen to be. For having all you want to spend is a state of mind, not a matter of hundreds, thousands, or millions of dollars of income. It is literally true that you are what you think, and when you think, therefore think abundance always. Every man gets just as much gold out of the world as he puts into it. All things are thought made. Every man must think his own gold into being. To him who believes he can, everything is an opportunity. Depend only upon yourself. Believe in yourself, but work in harmony with all things. Thus you call forth the best that is in yourself and secure the best that external sources have to give. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. The soul instinctively and rightly repels the idea of skimpiness. Like the whirlwind and the waterspout, I twist my environment into my form, whether it will or not. Success, from the most material to the most transcendental idea, combines its power into a triad: desire, expectation, preparation. As a man believes, so is he. Even desultory thinking is creative and brings results. Premeditated and orderly thinking for a purpose matures that purpose into fixed form so that you may be absolutely sure of the result of your dynamic experiment. The art of getting rich, opportunity in a new light, reaping and sowing. More and more is it being recognized that there is scarcely a single phase of existence which is not the result of the immutable laws. At one time, it was believed that only the physical kingdom was under its sway. Later, it was seen that in the moral world, cause and effect, heredity, as it was termed, was paramount. Because the working of the law cannot be readily observed, it does not follow that it is non-existent. The law of gravitation has always existed, although it was thousands of years before it was discovered. So in the same way, there are many laws in the universe today of which we never dream. Psychology in the West is too modern a science to permit one to dogmatize as to its limitations, but in every realm of inquiry, experience is teaching man that what he once regarded as chaotic is in reality an ordered sequence. That chance and luck are mere names invented to cover our ignorance of the underlying factors at work. Every thinking man and woman is forced to the conviction that justice rules the world. Any other conception is impossible. Yet were luck or chance, the absence of which does not necessarily imply the presence of fate, an actual force in the universe, justice would be incompatible with it. Think this well over before proceeding any further, because its acceptance admits such immense possibilities. A belief in it opens up a new world, and the unlucky, the downtrodden's life failures, the friendless, the outcast, all see in it undreamt of possibilities. Getting rich is as much under the domination of an immutable law as are the tides, and in this most wonderful of all the centuries, it will become manifest by the demonstration of those who employ it. All successful men and women obey this law, though they do so unconsciously, for it is impossible to work outside it. No success is the result of chance, though people will point to a single incident which served to raise an individual from poverty to affluence. A man can only reap what he sows, and the stumbling across the opportunity has been prepared by man himself previously, though he is probably unaware of it. The true inwardness of life can only be apprehended by the man who cognizes its operations upon all planes. And here and there such men have sprung up, shedding light upon what have hitherto been regarded as insoluble problems. As time goes on, this class will increase, and more will the universality of law throughout nature be proved. Within the last decade or two, the science of metaphysics has been brought down to a practical working code for the everyday life of the man in the street, and every teacher of practical psychology and scientific concentration could show from his own experience or that of his fellow students the truth of this. It is the application of this science with which many are concerned, and the application to the problem of daily life of a law which is unerring and which places prosperity within the reach of every man or woman. In nature, there is a constant tending of things from better to best, a proceeding from simplicity to complexity, but a complexity which means wider scope, more adaptability. We name this tendency evolution, and it must not be restricted to the narrow sense in which it is generally used. Nature ever aims at perfection and evolving or expounding so that more life may be expressed, and however slow this process may seem to the impatient reformer who expects with a single act of Congress to abolish poverty, crime, and injustice instantly, it is nevertheless very sure. Man can, however, delay the march forward. He can fall out of the ranks for the time being and rejoin later, but he must sometime or other obey the law of his being. A man of iron constitution may treat his body with impunity long past the period a more delicate man could, but later he has to pay the penalty. The purpose of evolution has not been recognized fully yet, so man has blundered along and created for himself poverty and vice, disease and old age, and thereby learned a much needed lesson. For all experience is but a lesson. He is beginning to wriggle out of it, and when he really desires a change, he will get it. Cooperation with nature is the point to aim at, for by so doing, he achieves his true goal. There is one fact from which there is no getting away. Progress is eternal. A man can help in this progress if he wishes. There does not seem one epoch in the history of the world when the inhabitants of it were more alive than today. Mental activity and industrial activity were surely never more intense. Scarcely a plot of the earth's surface remains unmapped, and few regions that are at all hospitable but have been annexed by some government or other. We have vast continents in an undeveloped condition, and the wealth of the world continues to increase at a rapid rate. If there are more for the trade of the world, there are more opportunities than ever there were. Life is far more complex. The wants of today have been 1,000-fold increased as compared with those of our forefathers. A lesser evolved nation follows in the wake of the United States and Europe, and that they will is a foregone conclusion. Look at Japan. More and more wealth will be created. It is outside my purpose to consider whether all this leads to more happiness among humanity. The point is that where a century ago there was one opportunity, today there's 100 consequent upon our complex civilization. This complexity is the outcome of the forces of evolution at work, and rightly interpreted, like pain and disease, are important factors in the advancement of man's conquest over his environment. Opportunity is not that which comes once or twice in a man's lifetime, but something which may be created at pleasure. This superstition has perhaps played more havoc with the human race in all ages in regard to getting on in life than that of any other. Quite a host of proverbs foster this delusion, such as every dog has his day. There is a time in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Few men can say that they have not missed opportunities. We all do frequently, and it is galling when so many men become despondent and lose heart when they realize they have allowed a splendid chance to slip through their fingers, especially if, as sometimes happens, it is apparently through no fault of their own. The superstitions in which they have been cradled, which obsess their parents and great-grandparents, which confront them nearly every day of their lives among their fellows, thundered at them from the pulpits, emphasized in the literature of all nations and times, objectivized in the columns of the newspaper, in the records of crime and suicides, but above all in one's own daily life, it is perhaps not surprising that the bogey of opportunity should bear the semblance of reality. How many men have not fallen under the glamour of this gigantic illusion? When tired out with writing dozens of letters or tramping many weary miles and meeting with repeated failure to secure a berth, they have exclaimed, "It's just my luck." You see, the idea is so ingrained in one's makeup, part of your own nature, that it seems very real. If I could convince you of one's nature that it seems very real, if I could convince you of its emptiness, these pages would not have been written in vain. Yet I do not hesitate to assert that opportunity is not a thing which fate provides for man, but something created by man himself. The limits of space do not permit the proof of this assertion being shown step by step, but that man is master of his fate has been proved by hundreds, if not thousands, of students of concentration and faith in self in America, the home of the movement which is spreading over East and West rapidly and destined in the not far distant future to revolutionize all our preconceived ideas of the world, man's place in it, and his destiny. This emancipation from the ogre of circumstances is not instantaneous. It is a matter of growth because it is based on law, outside which neither gods nor men are able to step. We live in a veritable age of advancement, surmounted as we are by the triumphs of science and industry. But we are merely in the kindergarten of the powers of which men are now learning something. Create your opportunities, but how? By having belief in yourself. Remember that to him that hath faith in himself shall be given, but him who hath no faith in himself, even that which he hath shall be taken away. This truth, have faith in yourself, has been lost sight of except by a few, and they have not sought to force it upon a humanity which is not ready to receive it. Even today, with some, it is a matter of experiment, more or less. The ideas set forth here may not be fully appreciated by many, and for them the time has not arrived for the practical using of their thought force. Even otherwise intelligent literary critics have shown a deplorable want of knowledge on the most elementary laws of practical metaphysics. Luckily for their bumptiousness, their opinions are in cold type, so that the world will be able later to measure their ignorance by the demonstrated powers of thought. A sign of the times is the thousands of students of concentration. He can who thinks he can. He can who thinks he can. Here is the burden of this chapter, and were it expanded to 1,000 pages, it could only reiterate the fact. Now let us see if there is any connection between what precedes this section. We have on the one hand a busy world, daily expanding on the lookout for men with brains, willing to pay handsomely for them. Such princely salaries were unknown in bygone days, because then there were not the possibilities there are today. There are plenty of third-rate men, the market is glutted with them, but on all hands it is admitted that men cannot be found to fill the responsible positions that are waiting to be filled. Why is it the age of young men and women? Why are young fellows ousting men of experience in large and important business houses? Because the spirit of progress is in the air. New times demand new methods, and when men and women attain a certain age, their minds, like their bodies, ossify, becoming capable of emitting the wave of new ideas which is spreading over the world. Old age affects temperament, does not favor the permeation of ideas quickly except here and there, where a mind well up in age is tuned to a certain pitch to catch the vibrations. The root of the problem lies in one's mentality. Most men take themselves as they are. They believe that they are limited in certain directions, and therefore they never attempt to transcend those limitations. It stands to common sense that if a man has not a good opinion of himself, no one else will have. The world takes a man at his own valuation, and if he labels himself a nobody, the world is scarcely to be blamed for believing it. A man is fettered in circumstances because he is fettered in mind first. The mental outlook determines the physical one. One's circumstances are always the visible results of one's thought. All actions are the outcome of our thoughts. Therefore, our environment is self-created. Some men like to think they are the victims of circumstances, as it saves them a lot of trouble. They can remain quiescent and put forth no new effort when things go wrong, as they inevitably must. Under such circumstances, they turn around and say, "It's just what I expected, everything's against me." Man has usually been hypnotized by the belief that he is the result of his environment, the sport of fate. What wonder when this is the attitude adopted that he cripples the aspirations which would lead him to better and higher things. Such a view of life must affect his progress, because a man is that which he believes he is. While this distorted view is held, he fetters himself, because then he is incapable of formulating ideas which would give him financial freedom. Everything which enters the avenues of the senses produces impressions, and it is within man's power to refuse admission to any set of impressions. An undesirable element may crop up in his environment, but he may forbid its entering his mind, and so long as he prevents undesirable thoughts or things, both are much the same, from entering his consciousness, he cannot be affected by adverse conditions. The mind cannot follow two trains of thought at the same time, and at the center of the mind, man is perfectly free to initiate or originate any thought he likes. It is only on the periphery, as it were, that he is at the mercy and impressions and thoughts of others. And so long as he centers his usual consciousness on this outside, so long must he expect to be lacking in originality, force, judgment, and resourcefulness, without which prosperity cannot successfully be wooed. The periphery of the mind is made up of the scum of the current thoughts of the day, of Tom, Dick, and Harry, of the common garden man who thanks his stars. He is like the rest of his fellows. The owner is pleased to call it his mind. It is the unconscious receptacle of any thoughts of a similar nature. Man alone possesses the power to either accept or reject thoughts, and it is by virtue of this fact that we have such a multiplicity of objects around us. It is the presence of the marvelous inventions and the extraordinary advances made by modern science that demonstrates this unique power. Only one greater power can be possessed by any creature, the ability to create thought. The man who can initiate thought is the man who has the world at his feet. Analyze the conversation around you daily, and you will never by any chance hear an original thought, because everyone thinks from the outside of his mind, not the center. Yet, that center exists, and it is the receptacle of the most precious gem the world can imagine. Its presence is unexpected because it has never been developed. It has been taken for granted that a man was what nature made him, that the brain he was born with could not be enlarged in its powers. Yet every day, this view is demonstrated to be false. Dull boys have become brilliant men. Lads, the sons of laborers, showing no marked ability even when manhood was reached, have startled the world by their achievements in science, art, commerce, or literature. Their fellow men have regarded them as being geniuses, as being born with the faculties with which have made them famous. Many a poor farmer has given the true source of the powers displayed, and genius is only a capacity for taking pains. So in the same way, every man may be clever in some direction or other if he only desires to be. Some men who have been absorbed in some pursuit have found that it did not yield the success they sought. It is possible, in such cases, to so develop their thought that ways and means will suggest themselves for improving to the fullest the gifts they have created by their own efforts. He hasn't got it in him is a common expression applied to some men, yet these same men, when driven to extremities, have risen above circumstances. The policy of 99 men out of 100 is to drift. When they have learned their calling, they take no more interest in it, and at that point stagnation begins. A man or woman cannot stand still. The order of nature is eternal progress, and as man is the highest product of nature, he is a participator in this onward march. He can delay his evolution if he wishes, as already stated, but he cannot prevent it. On the other hand, he can hasten it immensely by understanding the laws. One expression of this eternal progress is the demand for the best. Even poor people want the best, whatever it be. One of the causes assigned for the falling off of Canadian trade with England is that the goods are not packed as tidily and nicely as those of American and other competitors. There is a sense of beauty arising in even humble quarters among people one would suppose to be quite indifferent. The public is more exacting in its demands, and what is good enough for our forefathers is not good enough for us. Criticism was never more rife among every section of the community than today. No one and nothing can escape it, and the quickened intelligence is spreading among all classes. The tendency of the age is a desire for more freedom, wider life, a broader outlook. There is desire for more power. Discontent is evident on all hands. There is dissatisfaction with things as they exist at present, and the world is filled with organizations to remedy evils of every kind. Enough has been said to show the existence of a factor which is pushing man on, and it is a law that the presence of a desire is evidence of the provision of means to express that desire. The desire to be prosperous is a perfectly legitimate one. Those who in the old days took the vow of poverty no doubt accomplished the development they sought along other lines. But poverty under present-day conditions is a very different thing, and there is nothing to recommend it. The glamour and romance which once surrounded it have disappeared. In a world which is, as has been said, daily increasing in wealth and must continue to increase until every square yard of the earth that can be tilled or exploited has rendered its service to man, there is no necessity for poverty. No one need be poor, nor need anyone be governed by circumstances. Every man may make his own. The primary step to be taken is the creation of a desire or wish to reach some point. Without this, riches will not trouble anyone. While there is, as stated above, considerable discontent in the world with present conditions, there is a large class of persons who regard contentment as the one virtue to be cultivated above all others. They try to believe that happiness and contentment are synonymous because somebody somewhere at some time said or taught so. That is sufficient. They tell each other of this, and by dint of assiduously endeavoring to believe it, contentment is sanctified. In this way, some of the greatest humbugs and illusions of the ages have acquired an odor of truth and respectability. Contentment is one of them. When a man is quite content, he is on the downgrade. He has ceased to grow. so long as growth remains in animal or plant stagnation is impossible. The meaning of growth is desire to express the individual or nature, and once that end has been attained, there is a gradual decadence, simply because there is nothing more to express. Nature will not tolerate lumber, and the man who believes he has exhausted his powers is removed from the scene of his operations. He signs his own death warrant. It has frequently been remarked how businessmen who have retired and had no hobby have not long survived their new existence. The creation of a desire is not difficult, but there must be clearness in the desire and persistency in holding it, because if the desire is nebulous and spasmodic, the man will not work understandingly and the prosperity will be haphazard. He must outlive the good he has in view, and if this is adhered to, it will materialize. As mind exists for the expression of the man, so once a man has created by his thought an environment, that environment must surround him sooner or later. No power on earth can keep it away from him. He may delay its consummation because he will have to outwear the causes he has set going, but every cause must be exhausted sometime. As soon as a man has realized in his consciousness the goal he aims at, people and things instrumental to his success will be magnetically drawn to him. For like attracts like on every plane. Many instances of this could be cited were space sufficient. By the creation of new desires, new thoughts and ideas will spring into being. And by nursing these ideas, ways and means will occur, and the man will say, "I wonder, I never have thought of this before." When Edison wishes to get light on a problem, he just sits still and thinks quietly until the knowledge comes. Intuition is a real force in every human being, but thanks to the practical attitude taken everywhere, it has been almost stifled. The genius and the inventor get flashes now and then which illuminate them for the moment, and any man or woman could do the same if he or she cultivated the power. Concentration, as students have told me, has made them over again, and the individual of little intelligence need not despair, for the whole of the consciousness cannot manifest at once. Consciousness is like an iceberg. The portion which is seen corresponding to the ordinary consciousness is only a tithe of the real size of the berg, which is hidden away in the depths of the water. Many a man who has passed 40 or 50, who has not led an active mental life, gets it into his head that he is too old to pull his brains together, that it is all very well for a young fellow. Suppose, for instance, he decides to improve his education and commences to take up the study of some subject. He is brought into touch with new terms, strange words, and lines of thought quite foreign to him. He finds his mind muddled, to use his own words, and he gives the study up, disgusted. He either comes to the conclusion that he is not cut out for study or that he is too old to begin to learn. Both suppositions are wrong. Any teacher will tell him that it is the universal experience that when new subjects are taken up, the mind rebels because it is against the law, which proclaims that the path of non-resistance is always the easiest. Water will always select a channel before ground strewn with obstacles, and a man who has always done a habitual act with the right hand will experience great difficulty and awkwardness if he uses the left. Every thought marks a channel in the brain or affects a certain area, and when a new channel is to be dug, there are many difficulties to surmount. A little patience and persistence will enable any man to take himself in hand, and he may take up the study of anything he chooses. Going back to what has been said, he will see that his mind is undisciplined, that it has bossed him up to now, and that naturally it resents being taken in hand and compelled to go along a certain line. Once desire has been awakened, the mind will cast about for some means to achieve the end it has in view, and provided it is not damped by race thought, it will mature plans which will inevitably bring to pass the goals sought. When it is remembered that every one of the millions of cells which our body is composed has a consciousness all its own, quite independent of the body, often termed by some schools of psychologists the group consciousness, and that each atom before it disintegrates has the power of handing over as a legacy to the incoming tenant its own rate of vibrations, it will be understood why all of us possess different natures. It will also explain why the things we would do we are unable to accomplish at first. Thanks to the law of change which permeates every part of nature, there is no characteristic possessed by any human being which cannot be absolutely transformed, which accounts for the startling changes seen in some people. Even the eternal hills are never a moment at rest. Particle by particle changes, molecule by molecule undergoes transformation, and in the interior of the earth the same changes are taking place. Life and motion are the same thing, so-called rest being but a change of motion. It is useful to remember these facts of exact science because they are so pertinent to the matter we are dealing with at present. As every force acts along the line of least assistance, the forces of mind inevitably flow along those channels which have been carved by habit, and habit is but another name for race thought, plus environment and education. When one applies common sense to concentration, and this is its very basis, the miraculous elements with which it is credited assume their proper proportions, and any thoughtful man is bound to accept the main proposition of the new psychology. New channels can always be made, and as the old ones are not used, they dry up, as it were, or become obliterated in time. Thoughts flow just as easily along the used ones. Keeping this in view, and the fact the surface of the brain has always areas which are like blank phonographic records, the student will understand the need of application. The direction of a desire will be unconsciously guided along some line for which there is some taste. There's not a human being who has not some taste or tendency. If these appear to be general, and you cannot make up your mind, which you should cultivate to the exclusion of the others, do not worry about the thing, but sit alone at intervals and have a good think with yourself. Try and cultivate a receptive attitude, and often you will find an idea will flash into your mind that will appeal to you instinctively as being worth noting. By dismissing it or allowing the thought to be turned out by an obtruding thought is to render its reappearance less probable, so that you should determine that you are going to think it up for all it is worth. Practical reverie of this kind is a necessary factor in prosperity building, for many suggestions undreamt of will occur spontaneously. Your brain attuned to certain vibrations will intercept similar vibrations of other minds by a well-known law of psychology. Just as telegraphic or wireless messages are intercepted at times. Having nursed your desires and found your own line, you will find that after all, questions as to ways and means are not so difficult. When this stage is reached, a course of reading of biographies of successful men should be undertaken. The material for this class of literature is easily accessible nowadays, and some points will soon be picked up. The presence in nearly every case of belief in oneself will suggest to the reader that this is an essential, almost the first essential. Some writers make belief the starting point, but I have always doubted the wisdom of this plan, as belief is one of the hardest things to induce without a motive, and desire supplies this. Want of belief has stood in the way of achievement in so many times, even in the case of earnest students, that anything which will make it more easily obtained is worth considering. Going carefully over what has been said, one will become increasingly familiar with the line of thought, and it will gradually work itself into the consciousness until it becomes part of his very being. What has so long been wanting has been a reason for things in existing systems of thought. Training have not provided this. The point which the universe has reached in evolution at present enables any thoughtful observer to apprehend the why and the wherefore in a manner which would be utterly incomprehensible to our forefathers, who could only deduce from what they saw around them. The wider and grander interpretation of the cosmos was only possible to men of the 20th century because the unfolding in the past had not proceeded at so rapid a rate as in this wonderful century when things are accelerated in every direction. Belief being a matter which is within everyone's power to increase as he will, provided he only goes about it the right way. The student not lose heart because he does not achieve results rapidly. Remember that it is the same with thought as it is with food. It is not the quantity supplied to the organism, but the quantity which is assimilated that counts. Confidence is begot in oneself by carrying out whatever policy one decides upon. In other words, belief is of a twofold nature, thought and action. It is only by doing things that one comes to actually believe and actually to achieve increases with every action performed. Begin to think better of yourself, for it is generally the people who have a poor opinion of themselves that never get anywhere. Their belief works itself out in their character, their demeanor, showing itself even in the physical characteristics, such as the walk, position of the head, the carriage, the expression. Cast to the winds those enslaving old saws which used to console the failures of the past and rob them of initiative. Knowing something of the times in which they were coined, they were the natural outcome of the age, the expression of the mental life. Authority is responsible for the self-condemnation and disbelief in oneself, which has spread over so many people. Make a new start. Learn to trust in yourself. You may make mistakes at first, but the more you cultivate your intuitions and rely upon them, the greater will become your reliance in your own power. When a voice speaking in England or France can be heard in America without any visible means of connection, it is not taxing your credulity to ask you to believe that space is filled by thought vibrations of various types, and that one is automatically switched on to the type which is thinking along the same lines. The success of all experiments in wireless telegraphy or telephony depend upon harmony between the transmitter and the receiver. Both being tuned to the same key, the waves of ether carry the vibrations set up the transmitter to the receiver, which is keyed to respond to those particular vibrations. Now I will split up, for purposes of illustration, the thought atmosphere into layers of differing density. The heavy, sluggish layers may be regarded as representing the thought found in the majority of the people. This layer will be composed of ordinary, dull as ditchwater thought, and when a man is content with an uncongenial environment, his thoughts sink down to this level. When he is inclined to be retrospective, this murky sea of thought surges around his brain. He unconsciously absorbs and stores away in his mental storehouse masses of this destructive thought. The more he stored away, the more frequent would be the habit of chewing the cud of the bitter reflections, and his brain machine would respond more readily to the vibrations of this lowest level of thought. This would produce a state of mind where he felt that he must let loose the accumulated mass of thought to gain relief, and he would yearn for sympathy. To whom would he unbosom his troubles? Should he go to the successful man, the prosperous merchant? No, because he would be unappreciative. He would fail to understand him. The optimist would cheer him up, and he would feel that it was not exactly what he wanted at that moment. A callous man could not give him the aid he sought, so he would seek solace from someone who had experienced the same difficulties he had passed through. How common are such instances? Birds of a feather, like attracts like. He who would be prosperous must avoid the unlucky, the unfortunate, for the sympathy they receive in this direction, but fetters them more closely as it keeps their mentality on the low plane it should have risen above. Raise the thoughts by determination, not to succumb to the temptation of dwelling upon actual conditions. These were the result of previous thought, and so the future is being woven of the fabrics of the present, your thought. For as the student must again be reminded, all action is preceded by thought. By the initial impulse, you raise your mentality to another higher plane. And every time you succeed in doing this, you strengthen your thought by the accession of analogous thoughts from the minds of men who have scaled the heights of prosperity. You catch or intercept their thought currents, strengthening and solidifying your own mental structure. Unused brain areas will now be brought under contribution. Having created new permanent channels, it will not be found difficult to maintain them, and belief in yourself will have been achieved. The one great task which renders the accomplishment of all else comparatively simple. I will now consider some additional factors in the law of prosperity, and in the forefront of these must be placed concentration. Every time the mind wanders off, bring it back. Avoid abstract ideas when exercising for the acquirement of this faculty. Concrete examples should be taken which the everyday life offers. It is infinitely easier to concentrate on that in which we are interested. Let that subject be your work, whatever it may be. Let your work be representative of yourself, and your best self at that. If you're an employee concentrating on your work, it will be more thoroughly done, and you are unwittingly fitting yourself for a higher position. It will insensibly lead to your taking a live interest in your work. And if this is done, it will make you a better workman. Doing a thing because it is your livelihood and doing it because you love to do it are two widely different things, and he who loves his work never finds time hang heavily upon his hands. He rarely gets tired and hence extracts a joy from his daily duties, which the artificial pleasures of theater or ball do not yield to their devotees. It follows that equability and calmness will be built into the nature, and incidentally the health will be improved. A good health will be needed unless one be left a fortune, and even then riches without it will not benefit one much. Besides, the doing of a thing well fits a man to undertake more responsible work, and if his present employment does not offer this, he will find the opportunity later or create it himself. A good memory is a necessity, and concentration is an important aid. Mind wandering, or the dissipation of mental energy, which is so commonly found in the unsuccessful in life, is more effectively corrected by concentration than by anything else. And one secret of concentration is interest, a real, living, intense, wholehearted interest. This is a quality which is generally very colorless in man who lacks riches. If he has any live interest, it is not a constructive type, but takes his mind along channels which do not accomplish anything. As a rule, a man who is wholly absorbed in a subject has a good memory as regards that topic. He retains a mass of facts and figures which, applied to another subject, would make him an expert. So he who would acquire the art of getting rich must cultivate his memory. A promise once made must be fulfilled, for the old-time excuse of a bad memory may pass occasionally, but it will not always be accepted. More money is lost through a bad memory than is supposed. Many a good order, which would have led to larger ones, has been lost through failure to call upon a customer or send him some data required. We in the West are always too ready to promise because we do not wish to displease our friends, but one should be very chary in giving one's word when there is not much probability of carrying out what you have pledged to do. Do not imagine that it is a good plan to improve a bad memory by relying upon it for a mass of details which it has no right to contain. Modern life gives us myriads of facts and things to remember with which our forefathers never had to trouble themselves, with the result that there is a far greater tax upon the power of recollecting. There is no particular virtue in loading up the memory with trivialities, things which the mind cannot use for any purpose. Therefore, these small things should be delegated to a notebook. Have no fear that the mind will be weakened thereby. Rather, will it leave it the freer to attend to the really important things, for after all, the really important things one does in a day's work are few. But the bulk of the time of many is spent in pottering about. Even the day's work of so many called busy men could be boiled down to a couple hours, through a want of system and method, and a paying of time and attention to insignificant things quite out of proportion to the necessities of the case. With the use of notebook commences order system, the delegation of duties to their proper quarter, the saving of time which can well be devoted to the working out of problems which bear on the fact of the advancing and the conservation of mental energy which would otherwise be exhausted. A prominent cause of failure in modern life is the worry habit, and this is induced as much by a multiplicity of details as by anything else. The man who would solve the problems of riches must be a calm temperament, but the man who worries has a mind alien to this requirement. With the relief of the mind from the little matters, the memory can readily be trained to respond and to yield up whatever is required of it. Then the full meaning of that oft-quoted phrase, "His word is as good as his bonds," will carry weight with it. No man can rely upon himself alone together. Put a man in the Sahara Desert and he might remain there all his life and never be a cent more in his pocket. Put him on the other hand, where there are a number of men, and it is certain that someone will want his help or counsel in some way. Man is naturally a gregarious animal, and he is a dissatisfied one too. That is, he is always wanting something which he thinks will minister to his comfort. It is this very never-content attitude which evolves him, and he may plan or theorize to secure more of these comforts. He has to invoke the aid of his fellow men in some shape. Man, being a bundle of wants, is the safeguard of his getting on. Through it, new industries spring into existence every day. New luxuries or necessities, according to the view taken, arise, and the demand must be met. The man in request will be he who anticipates the wants or demands of his fellows. History teems with examples of men of this type, and the evocation of faculties which perfect the judgment will show what is wanted and how it is supplied to it. It is the man with ideas that the world wants, and whatever he asks will be given him. The law of wealth. How will the riches come, you may ask? Never mind for the moment. You have made up your mind that you are going to climb the path to prosperity, leaving the work out to your interior forces. As has just been said, there are innumerable walks in life which the one-sided narrow existence of our forefathers rarely dreamt of. It may be through invention, through employment of a gift which has long lain in the recesses of the mind, unsuspected, through what you may call accident or luck. But remember, whatever you create mentally is absolutely certain to express itself outwardly. This is the law. You doubt it? Look at any man who is not well-to-do. He is accustomed, when considering finance, to think in six figures. Does he not, as the head of the household, often say, "We can't afford this"? Is he not ever seeking to economize along this line or that, or complaining, if in business, of the heavy rates and the increasing cost of things and the keenness of competition, which will eventually drive him out of the place? I do not assert that every man who is not wealthy talks like this, but I do say that all who think poverty express poverty. Getting into close contact with the poor will show that they never hold large ideas concerning money, and usually consider themselves incapable of organizing and conducting large concerns. They depreciate themselves and therefore never rise above the average in regard to money. You will rarely hear them speak of what they intend to do in the future. Seldom will they go beyond a wish, which usually is expressed thus: "I wish I could find a lot of money." Most successful men become so with no knowledge of the law. It is done unconsciously, therefore one does not often hear of their saying beforehand they intend being or doing. Andrew Carnegie and one or two other self-made men have put this on record, but I do not remember coming across any other instances. What I am seeking is the case of practical dreamers, who are naturally few and far between. I could cite instances of students who have put the law into operation and benefited accordingly, but the best example, which will be known to most people, is the conception found in fiction in the character of Svengali. You remember that when he was in the direst straits and could not pay his rent, he would say, "One day I shall be rich. I shall have a carriage, a big fur coat, and even princes will pay me homage." He held to this ideal in spite of the squalor which seemed as though it would always surround him. He had an unquenchable faith in himself and dreamed daily of the future that he planned. This is the system upon which one should proceed. Ignore present conditions utterly. Live in an atmosphere of plenty, whatever be your actual environment. You create your future from the present, just as the present is the outcome of the past. Do not postpone, even in thought, the advent of riches. Act as though you were already wealthy, that you had achieved the goal in view, that the wish which takes foundation will have passed into expectancy, which is a very different attitude, something far beyond hope. From what has been said, it follows that one must practice constructive thinking, which is a very different thing from ordinary thought, a haphazard, happy-go-lucky way of thinking. By constructive thinking, you have a purposive plan, where before you had no plan whatever, where the thought was merely adrift. Whatever presented itself to the mind, a thought repeated has a tendency to recur more readily accordingly as mind may be at liberty or not disciplined. Discipline is always suggestive of something unpleasant, of duty, of something which runs in the face of the line of least resistance. A strong body results from use, from exercise, and even a robust and physically perfect body would lose its virility, its strength, by not being used. The case of the mind is just the same. The forceful, purposive mind can only result from ordered and trained thinking. The conception of training thought is a novelty to most people, but it is just as rational as training the fingers to play the piano like a Podruski. The difference between the budding pianist, represented by the average man, and the artist is a question of time. His skill is not a gift. The only gift he possessed was an unshakable determination to master the task. He had set himself and an aptitude for hard work, and without these no man may hope to get rich. There are too many people who are always seeking a quick get-rich method and are doomed to disappointment, for nature never gives something for nothing. There is an increasing number who yearn for opulence, but who never raise a finger to obtain it, and it cannot be too plainly said that there is no magic, no mysteries in the lines laid down here, merely a using of the materials every human being possesses. The world is ever looking for the new, the latest, the great things, and it pays handsomely for them. Evolution being a progression, conditions are always undergoing modification, and natural resources are more and more taxed. The mere fact of the invention of the motor car has led to the use of vast capital for the growing of rubber. The same cause has led another brain to attempt the solution of an adequate supply by the invention of a substitute for rubber much cheaper. Such illustrations can be multiplied easily, and it is open to any man or woman to anticipate the wants of the world and provide them. By constructive thought, the faculties of the mind which have long lain dormant will be roused into activity, and in this rousing, an expansion of the normal consciousness results. This gives an utterly new outlook upon life. As thought becomes constructive, all the old poverty-stricken ideas will die out. Circumstances have always dictated the type of thinking a man in financial difficulties, if he is of a sunny, careless type, may treat them lightly or even philosophically, but from time to time his environment compels him to face the situation. This brings his mind in line with the orthodox thought, and in this way, old thought is maintained. The habitual outlook upon life is kept intact. The self-made manacles are riveted, the firmer about the victim who treads the old path, follows the rut which the feet of countless millions have trodden. A standard is formed, and every thought is judged according to it. If it agree to it, well and good, it is accepted. If it deviate from the pattern, it is thrown aside. A man rather prides himself on having concocted such a standard of value. It seems to him that it is a piece of originality, that it places him above other men, that he possesses judgment, discernment, tact, a discriminating mind. It is now necessary to recapitulate or cast into concise form the propositions laid down. They might be stated in these terms. First, both the world and man are in their babyhood. Secondly, the purpose of life is to express more life. Third, more life can only be expressed by man's desires being fulfilled. Fourth, every desire must inevitably materialize unless neutralized by a counter-desire. Fifth, science has not yet found any limits to the power of man. Sixth, the capacity for more power comes with the fullest use of present capabilities. Seventh, the only obstacle which can prevent man from entering into riches or anything else he wants is doubt of himself. Burn these statements into your brain. Concentrate your mind upon them, whether in tram, car, train, or walking, and fortify yourself by building up a strong inward confidence now and then as opportunity offers. There's no need to devote hours per day. It is the persistency which tells, and by cutting off the supply of pessimistic thought as served up for your declaration in the press, pulpit, conversations, pictures, and literature, and seclude your thought atmosphere for a time, you'll be the better for it. To define riches is no light matter. Tastes differ and opinions vary. The vicar of Wakefield was passing rich on $194.80 a year, but an individual with a large establishment and a high social position to uphold might consider $100,000 scarcely adequate. The writer would prefer to term that man rich who had sufficient to meet all his wants, which might be few or many, simple or extravagant. More effort would be required in the case of building up a big fortune than a modest competency, but the same principle would apply in each case. The preceding pages are written in the midst of a busy life, and no pretense to a literary style is made. The sole object, in the view of the writer, has kept before him has been to aid that ever-increasing class who in a world of plenty have not sufficient to gratify the natural wants. As to the moral side of the question, the author contends that it is the duty of every man to his country to have enough to keep him from want. By so doing, he makes one pauper the less, and is in a position to help his fellows, for no man can truly rise without raising his fellows. The new industries which have sprung into existence during the past 2 centuries, many initiated by single individuals, have found employment, some of it highly paid, to hundreds of thousands of people, in spite of what has been said of machinery ousting men. Poverty has had its day as an idyllic conception. The world has had enough of it. and there are now other factors which will develop character in a much more satisfactory manner. Let those who still sing the praise of being poverty-stricken look the facts full in the face, and they will be almost bound to admit that in nearly every case it dwarfs the man's crippling his finest feelings and stunning his highest nature. Poverty is a crime against the state, and it is also as much a disease as any physical malady, and as such is curable. The writer boldly asserts that no man or woman who applies the rules for getting rich can help becoming so, and the teachings can only be proved by being put it to the test. Reading is of little use. The pages must be read and reread till they permeate one's being. No statement has been made which has not been demonstrated. If the student fails to demonstrate the truth of the assertions, it is not they which are at fault but himself. He is not manipulating unchanging law, and his inability to demonstrate it is no proof of its non-existence. In silence and calmness, listen patiently and do not argue. You have your freedom of thought. Better never to have been great than having been so, then fall forever to be so no more. A star that sets will rise again tomorrow. A star that falls rises no more forever. Search diligently for truth, no matter what the world may say. Press on. The golden star of self-reliance is on the heights with its dawning lights. On every height is found repose. There come to those souls who have no faith in themselves times when they become heart-sickened and weary. Alas, how many men of mature years are held back by doubt and self-condemnation because they do not and have never understood what it means to have faith in themselves. The very best part of many men and women lies buried beneath their own fears and doubts. Misunderstood, their fears hold them down with chains forged of doubt and unrest. To all, such a change is necessary. In fact, for the usefulness of their life, a change is imperative. As the student acquires knowledge, he must learn how it has been acquired, and he is made to feel that no fact is worth knowing unless with it he knows the way to prove it. Earnest students dare to be wise. In silence pursue the path of wisdom, regardless of the world or what it may say or any obstacle which it may throw in your way. Be wise, and you will not only govern your own destiny but show others the way, and you will possess a mind foreshadowing the future. By your prudence and foresight, you will be able to counteract that which more gross or untrained minds have suffered to pass as fate or destiny, whereby their faculties are confined to a narrow line of operation. And within this book, I have, in the Master Key, given you the duality of your being and the salient force. And thus, this ends The Secret of Abundance and the Art of Getting Rich. The chapter for the Art of Getting Rich is much longer. I abridged it for this episode. There's some other stories and examples he gives, and I recommend that you read the whole entire book, The Master Key, by Dr. L.W. de Laurence. There's a ton of amazing information. But I just wanted to do an episode on prosperity and the way he discusses it. As I always say on these, of course it sounds somewhat generic. You've heard these things before. It's helpful to hear it from other perspectives. Every single book on prosperity or essay on prosperity is talking about very much the same thing. Understand, when you look at the world, look at it with opportunity. It's one of the most important things that comes from the Laurence discussion. Even though this was written so long ago, 120 years ago, right? He is talking about something that's happening now. I remember that there was a time when there was no internet. I remember there was a time when a lot of the things we have today, like iPhones, didn't exist. It was a very short period of time when these things didn't exist, when we had no computers. When I get on my Commodore 64. And so there are new things that are coming. And there are changes in our technology and our environment that you can't imagine. And there's always things that we need to make life easier, to make life better, just as he discussed in the creation of the car and how rubber was needed for the tires, right? There's always something new. And so you have to be thinking with your mind in a happy state, in a condition of prosperity, where you're always seeing opportunity with everything around you in the world. If you don't have that prosperity mindset, then it is very difficult to move to the next level of spiritual mindset, because you're so locked in your current environment and aware of all the limitations around you. So take the things that he says, the advice that he says, just listen to the chapter, and you'll find that it changes the way you think. Take responsibility of your thoughts and become prosperous. Please put a like on this video and put a comment. Get this to circulate so other people can find the secrets of abundance and prosperity. Because everybody needs to know that they can change the conditions within their life by the way they think, by the way that they look at the world. Now, the one thing that I don't necessarily agree with is that you have to work hard to make money. I have found multiple examples, and in my own life, you don't necessarily have to work hard to make money, but you have to work smart. So back then, that was more applicable. Nowadays, because of advances in technology, it is very possible to be prosperous and not work very hard. The 4-hour work week is a real thing and has been a huge motivation for me. So I can only tell you, the master key is there. It's in your thought, following the laws of prosperity, understanding the nature of abundance and poverty as a sickness within your mind. You can change your world, and you can take care of the people around you and be of greater service to others. So I'd love to get your comments and ideas that you have that have inspired you from this particular episode. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.